Hey everyone, I want to introduce Grace. She's from New Zealand, which I hear has some awesome people, really funny, excellent sense of humor. Grace is going to talk. Here's some. Grace is going to talk to us about the history of lockpicking. So, welcome, Grace.
So some of you may have seen this talk before, so don't worry, I've added in some fresh content. This is the extended, uncut Shadow Brokers leaked version, so I've made sure to include some fresh things in there. So back in the land before time, making things secure wasn't really possible. The best bet was kind of burying your goods or having ways to detect if a thief had tried plundering your stash. In my case, it would be a stash of lychee jelly. I really like lychee jelly, so I'm always trying to hide that. So here are some examples of some knots that we use to try and detect entry. So these are two really similar knots, but to the trained eye, you can see the difference. So this top one here is a reef knot, and the bottom one is a thief knot. So as you can see, the different way that it's tied means that the end strings go in different directions. So you would have like kitchen cooks who would tie these knots to try and like see if people were stealing or like the chocolate or something like that. In Japan, you also had this is an example of a seal knot, which is used to tie a bag carrying a tea container for the tea ceremony. So these ceremonies were elaborate rituals that were practiced amongst like warlords and stuff like that. So there was a risk of people trying to poison the tea and stuff like that. So the idea with this lock, this knot, is that it's really difficult to tie. So only somebody who knows how to tie this and untie this can successfully make it look all beautiful like that. But now let's head to Mesopotamia. Did I say that right? It's this. It's kind of hard to see on that map. So in this area here, they had these things called these clay seals. So what this was is they had these really beautiful, elaborate clay seals, and in it, that hole in the middle would go this pin, which would be attached to like a cord or a plank or something, and then that pin was covered with more clay, and if the door was open, which would be what that cord or plank was attached to, then it would pull on the seal and the seal would crack. So this would be pretty hard to recreate the seal since it had all these like beautiful designs and stuff like that. And these have been dated as early as 4,400 BCE, which is like quite a long time ago. So what does this have to do with locks? Well, the pin used for these seals had the name Sikatu. I probably pronounced that wrong. And this means pin, but it was also the name that was used in pins in this really old style lock. This kind of old pin lock was found in Egypt, and so originally people thought maybe it was from Egypt, but through tracing those words back, you can kind of find that link to Mesopotamia. There's a really good example found of this kind of lock in this guy's palace. So this is the Assyrian king Sargon II, and he had this lock which was found in Khorsabad in his palace, and that was around 700 BCE. And this is like a strange kind of toothbrush-shaped thing with like these weird things that would kind of push up these pins. And then it was just warded locks for ages. Like pin locks just kind of vanished for a while. So you had about like 700 years of warded locks, and who really knows what was going on with Eastern locks as well. It's like really hard to find information on what was going on there, but it was probably wedge locks. Here's an example of a water key from medieval times. So one of the things with locks back in the day was that you had to be really wealthy to be able to afford having your stuff locked up. So they had these really massive keys to kind of show off. So for example, this key here is 31 centimeters long, and Justin Bieber has one just like it. We also had Romans sometimes would have their keys made into rings. So these really small keys were often used for trinket boxes. And for some wealthier women who could afford to have trinket boxes, this offered a small amount of agency where they could, keep secrets and secret love letters and jewelry, and they could keep that away from their husband as well. And this was important because this was at a time which was very woefully adverse to independent women. Here you can see one modeled by Mariah Carey. I visited a lock museum in Seoul, South Korea, and this is a selfie for scale to show how massive that key is. But they had lots of really interesting locks there. Lots of them were shaped like animals. A really popular shape was fish-shaped, and this is because it had three things that it symbolized. The first one was success. So there's this Korean expression of 100-year-old fish is able to turn into a dragon, and the next one was fertility because fish lay lots of eggs, and protection because fish never close their eyes when sleeping. So this fish locks will be found throughout like China, Japan, and Korea because of that symbol, the symbolism there. There are also lots of blocks with like don't feel like I need to explain that one. Here's some more. This is a turtle and some mice. I don't know why they designed their locks this way. There's another lock, this one which I thought was kind of interesting. One of the downsides to this museum is that it had very limited descriptions on things. So this one here looks like it has fake keyways, but you're not quite sure because that key there is definitely not going to be going into those keyways. The real keyway is in the side, on the right side of the lock. So yeah, maybe they served some purpose, but for some reason it wasn't described. This is a Nepalese lock, by the way. Here's another watered lock, which is very pretty, and it's like a close-up picture of it. But as you know, as you probably know, these are not necessarily effective because you can use like a bit of wire and bend it, and you can open the lock. This is one of my favorites. This is the kicking man detector lock. So the keyhole is concealed by the man's front leg, which operates on a pivot. So when a button is pressed, the leg swings forward to reveal the keyhole. And the door bolt is released by tilting the man's hat. The man holds a pointer against a dial, which is counting the number of times that have been opened. And there's like a little poem on there that says something along like, don't open me because otherwise I'll know, haha, or something. It said it in like more poetic ways. These two here are definitely my most favorite locks that I've come across. So you have the lion, and that one, if you try picking it and you mess up, it clamps down on your hand. And the lock on the left has a small pistol embedded in the top right corner. If you can see that there, that's where the pistol is. There was also this big thing about key charms. So this red flag was like this big, and that disc was like the size of a dinner plate. So they had these really beautiful key charms that would often have symbols like fertility again, or fish, or whatever. But again, it kind of sends this message of, like, I'm really wealthy and I have really important stuff that I need locking up and you can't get in, haha. Which, is the modern day equivalent is something like this. So now fast forward to the Industrial Revolution and the era of perfect security. So this was a time where patents were starting to become like a really big thing, and people were finding ways to manufacture lots of goods. And locksmiths were just going crazy on patents and finding new ways to manufacture locks. And not only that, but they were putting locks to the test kind of like never before, where they had lockpicking bounties and competitions that were popping up all over the place. So I'm just going to kind of go through some of those early innovations that happened at about that time. So this one is the double action lock, which was patented by Baron. This was kind of the beginning of lever locks, where this worked where the keys would lift up the levers like just the right amount, and if it lifted too high, then it would get kind of stuck. So you can see there's kind of like those jagged edges, but it only had 2 tumblers, and the so it kind of received some criticism for that because it's, there's not very many variations you can have on keys and stuff. But then along came the Chubbs family, and they improved on this design over the next like 30 years or so, producing a number of patents and adding more levers and making it possible to have up to 30 different changes per lever. So that was like some really serious business security back then. The Chubbs family were very proud of their locks. They even developed a lock which was believed to be unpickable. And this was the Chubbs detector lock, which looked like this. So the thing about this lock is that if you overset the levers, then they would get stuck there. And basically the pick lock would just have to give up because there was no way out after that. And you'd have to, send a message via horseback to your locksmith and say, help, somebody's tried breaking into my house, but they failed, which is good, but now I also can't get into my house. And they would have to bring along their another key which they would use, and they would turn it in the opposite direction to reset the levers, so then the lock was operational again. I also discovered while researching this that my house key looks exactly like this one, which happens to be the design that this is based on. It's not my actual house key, but it's very, very similar, but please don't rob me. You also had, Brammer had his challenge lock, where he was working on some crazy innovations with axial wafer locks. And he was so confident in this lock that he had it sitting in his shop window for decades, waiting to be picked, and he had a massive bounty on it, which was 200 guineas, roughly the equivalent in cash money of $20,000. Sorry, the image of the mechanism isn't very clear. But the point is with these locks is that it kind of comes down to time. Usually that's how the security rating is measured, is how long does it take to pick these locks. So a lot of people would try and use security through obscurity and trying to find all these like wacky ways of trying to stop people from picking locks, even though it wasn't using actual security, if that makes sense. I'm sure you're kind of all familiar with these concepts. So let's talk about the Great Exhibition. So this was held at the Crystal Meth Palace in England. There were heaps of people that came there, lots of famous people like Charlotte Bronte and Lewis Carroll, George Eliot, Charles Dickens, Charles Darwin, and they all did meth together, and it was great. And these events were, this big event had these locks on display, and so, you had lots of people were showcasing their designs, but these locks in particular, there was a really important thing that happened at this event, where Alfred Hobbs walks into the Crystal Meth Palace with all the swagger of Jay-Z, and this guy worked for Day & Newell, a lock-making company in the US. Hobbs was a bit of a sneaky salesman. He would go around picking people's locks, showing them how bad their security was, and then conveniently selling his own locks to people. So what he did is he went and picked these locks. So the Hobbs the Bramer challenge lock, that attempt required about 51 hours and over 16 days, and he eventually got there. And the Chubbs lock, what he did, he managed to pick that, I think, in like 25 minutes, where he was like carefully trying to find the trip point of each lever without oversetting it. So yeah, Chubbs was very, very shocked by this, and news went around that he had picked these locks, and people didn't believe that this was the case. They were just like, no, that's just not possible. Like, somebody just can't do that. But it was true, and it was the end of the era of perfect security. The other thing about these lockpicking challenges and these really kind of complex designs that were expensive to make, these events appealed more to hobbyists, and these locks were very expensive, and most of the time people want something that's cheaper and will mostly do the job. And these lockpicking competitions were meant to show the public how these locks would stand up against the fight, but turns out people weren't really that interested in it in reality, which is like unfortunate. But yeah, they were just too extravagant, so people would end up kind of buying more simple locks anyway. After this, you also had the modern Yale lock, which came into existence not long after the era of perfect security, and these were, the design was smaller and much easier to mass produce, so those became really, really popular. But another thing that happened around the time of the era of perfect security was open source locks. We're actually talking about the mechanisms inside of locks. So one member in particular of the Chubbs family went a little bit wild and decided to start publishing these lock mechanisms, including mechanisms of other people's locks. So he actually published about the Brahma's locks, and he would show locks from banks and like strong rooms and stuff like that. In fact, he was even so bold to say, to prove their utter insecurity, of drawing has been made of the lock and key. So this was kind of like a bit of a big deal, because before this, locks were kind of kept in secret, and like the mechanisms behind them, and people thought it would be more secure if you just didn't tell people, but instead it kind of just looked after the ignorance of the people, and it also manufacture of locks was very slow, because people didn't have this good flow of ideas in society and stuff like that. There were also, even Hobbes came out saying some pretty strong words about how we should be open about what's happening in the locks, and he was kind of saying that, it's a fallacy to think that by telling people how to pick locks that you're going to increase crime and stuff like that. Turns out crime was kind of going to increase anyway, thanks to the industrial era, and that exposing the inner workings of these locks didn't actually change anything. I mean, after all, it's just open at a place, or there's like windows you can break, or things, handbags being left around. Like, people will just find easier ways to steal things. You also had George Price, who was saying that learning how to pick locks is really good, because that way you can then design locks to protect against these ways of attacking. So these ideas were pretty new at the time and pretty radical for some people. So next, when I was kind of going through this, I realized that when I was reading about all these locksmiths, that they're all men, and I was like, maybe there's like some women who have done this stuff, who've done something interesting. And I had a look, and there was this article, and I was like, cool, there's some names. So I decided to like Google those, and there was like just nothing really that came up for either of these names. And then in fact, turns out that this post had just been like reposted, these all from different websites, and say roughly the same thing. So I just thought I'd put like a little bit of a shout out there, because it was really hard to find information on non-European locks and women in locksmithing. So if you know stuff, then yeah, feel free to put it out on the internet, because that would really do wonders for like the people coming through. So now I'm just going to leave you with a short story about this guy called Adamsworth. And this guy, he's the real-life criminal that Dr. Moriarty from Sherlock Holmes is based on. So what he did is, he did a massive jewellery heist in Africa. And the way that he did this is, he was playing chess with a postmaster who he knew had access to the post. which he knew contained some very valuable diamonds and jewelry. So he became friends with this guy, and he played chess with him for 3 months, got to know him, they became like best buddies, and then he started sending packages to himself. And what he did is he would go in at closing time, and the postmaster was like, oh, hey buddy, yeah, you want to get your stuff? No worries, here, have my keys, just like go in, help yourself, you're all good. So what he did is he promptly made wax copies of the keys, subsequently stole the jewelry, travelled back to London where he sold it in his legit jewelry dealership. And the only reason that we know he did this crime is because he confessed before he died to a detective many years later. But he got away with it at the time. So the point is remember, the easiest way to open a lock is with the key. Thank you. So, do we have any questions?
I have one for you.
Oh, okay.
You were talking about women in locksmithing.
Yeah.
Did you actually find any? And if so, what was the earliest reference you found to women in locksmithing?
Well, that's the thing. I didn't really find much. I found those articles that had just been kind of reposted. And didn't really contain, and they were by like, not real people as well. And they were just slightly reworded, just very, very differently. It was quite bizarre. Yeah, so, and then I kind of started asking people, and there's definitely being women involved because, often these were like family businesses and stuff like that. And if we go by other things in history, we know that women tend to contribute, but they don't seem to be recognized for those contributions. And like you could take, for example, like Mendelssohn, Felix Mendelssohn had a sister who was like equally good at music as he was, and so was Mozart had a sister who was also great. But again, they weren't really recognized for their like contributions and stuff. So just kind of like going by like other aspects of history, I believe that there's got to be cases out there, they're just not really published. So yeah, that's kind of my challenge to you guys. You should find some information about that.
The lock you had towards the beginning of your presentation that had the 2 fake watered keyways on it, you said it had a side entry keyway. Have you got an actual photo of the keyway on that?
No.
Or I Googled to find it?
I possibly can. I'm pretty sure I took this one here, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I took a photo of it, of the side one, but I just have to go back and find it because it wasn't right next to it when I put this in my slides. So.
All right, thank you.
If you want me to share it, then you can contact me and I can dig up that photo for you. But I think it was like this kind of, like the capital I shape was the shape of the keyway, kind of with the 2 things. Anyway.
Okay, on the shaft there, they didn't have anything to do with it. That was just for decoration, yeah.
Sorry,
The central part of the shaft of the key. That was just decoration, yeah.
Yeah, I think so. So like just like the bumps and stuff, yeah, they were just for looking nice. Most of the time the keys on some of the kind of locks like this would just be straight, like, and then would just have like the little bumpy bits at the end. And the rest was just decoration. Anything else? No? Alright, well thank you very much.